the dawn of the new millennium, two key events happened that will go on to form the building blocks of the Anglo Leasing scam. One, the Twin Towers bombing in New York on 9/11 of 2001. This would create more alertness, especially on borders. Therefore, Kenya, being a strategic ally of the United States, was pushed by Washington to upgrade its passport issuing systems. 2. In December of 2002, Kenya ended the 24-year reign of KANU. This was the party led by President Moi, and the economy was dominated by the Kalenjins. In its place, National Alliance Rainbow Coalition took over. It was led by President Kibaki, a member of Gema community. Kibaki was seen as a reformist who would restore Kenya's economic fortunes. But just like his predecessor, he surrounded himself with men and women from his tribe. Key ministerial posts and key permanent secretary posts were given to members of his Kikuyu and Gema community. The Interior and Security Minister was Chris Morongaru. The Justice Minister was Kiraito Morongi. The Finance Minister was David Mweraria. The Head of Public Service was Ambassador Francis Mudaura, while the Permanent Secretary for Governance and Ethics was John Githongo. Unlike the Golden Bug scam of 1993 that was complex and multi-level, the Anglo Leasing scandal was a basic procurement scam. The looters were to buy equipment at inflated prices and keep the profits, or not buy the equipment at all. Fortunately for Kenya, one of the people who were supposed to loot, John Githongo, did not. Githongo was the piece that refused to fit, the storm that rocked the boat, the glitch in their maths. He was the party pooper. He refused to be an accomplice when it was their time to it. He made a report concerning the scandal to President Kibaki. It was a damning report that named and shamed key politicians and businessmen. He detailed the chronology of the scam and gave his recommendations to the president, as he was his advisor on matters concerning corruption. The full letter can be downloaded on YouTube description on my channel. Later, another Michelle Rong serialized the life and times of John Githongo in her book, which was titled "It Is Our Time to Eat." However, this book never found any shelf life on Kenyan's bookstores. It was deemed too hot to touch. However, internationally, it was widely acclaimed. This, therefore, is the story of John Githongo, the inheritance of looting, the wheeler dealers of evil, the Anglo Leasing scandal. In 49 BC, Julius Caesar was returning to Rome after a successful campaign as the Roman army general in the Gallic Wars. He was returning to Rome for the glory. But the Republic current rulers, the same men that he had formed the Triumvirate, a political alliance to safeguard their interests, did not want him back. There was therefore a law that any man, either a Roman or not, who crossed the river Rubicon with an army was officially declaring a civil war. When Caesar came to the river, he became full of doubt, for now he was drawing nearer and nearer to that dreadful step. His mind wavered as he considered what a tremendous venture it would be upon which he was engaging. He began to go more slowly and then ordered a halt, For a long time, he weighed matters up silently in his own mind, irresolute between the two alternatives. In these moments, his purpose was constantly changing. Finally, in a sort of passion, as though he was casting calculation aside and abandoning himself to fate, he made up his mind. He made use of the expression which is frequently used by those who are at the point of committing themselves to desperate and unpredictable chances. He said, "Let the die be cast," and hurriedly crossed the Rubicon. Such were the thoughts that John Githongo had that fateful night when he decided to flee Kenya for UK. He knew once he released the incriminating dossiers, his life would never be the same again. A dark cloud had surely set on Kenya, and that would be a dent from which the reputation of the Kibaki era would never recover. John Githongo was born in 1965. He had a privileged upbringing. He was the son of an accountant. He went to the prestigious St. Mary's School and later to Wales for his degree. His father was an ambitious man. His accounting firm boasted of having, among others, President Jomo Kenyatta as one of the clients. In his quest to become great, John's father, took a 30 million loan from a government wheeler dealer known as Anura Pereira. This loan was advanced to him through Anura's lawyer, one A.H. Malik. He purchased the property in Kitisuru, Nairobi. When John returned to Kenya after his studies, he briefly worked as a management consultant before immersing himself into the world of journalism and activism. He was a brave crusader for anti-corruption, writing extensively on the evil and calling out corruption in the Moi government. He witnessed firsthand as Kenya lost 158 billion shillings in the infamous Golden Berg scandal of 1993. He noted that at the heart of the scandal was a broker or wheeler dealer called Ksh.50 Kamlesh had formed the Golden Berg International Company, provided the documentations, most being false, received the payments from CBK, and then shared the loot with the facilitators, either in cash or by financing the 1992 general elections. Other brokers during the Moi era were Arura Penera, who had just given Joe, Githongo's father, a loan of 30 million shillings, Samanlal Kamani, who infamously tendered to supply 1,000 units of Mahindra jeeps at a cost of 1 million Kenya shillings each to the Kenya police, and a businessman known as Jimmy Wanjigi. These wheeler dealers had greased the hands of every politician, whether in government or in opposition. A calculated move, since they knew that those in opposition today will be in government someday. And it was them, during the era of Moi, that formed briefcase companies that neither had physical offices or a history of doing business. They thrived in Moi's era and hoped to do so in Kibaki. John wrote extensively on these issues, even co-founding the Kenyan chapter of the Transparency International, TI, and was always at the forefront of calling out on corruption. Then, when NAC took office in 2003, he was presented with the highest platform, a permanent secretary position for governance and ethics under the office of the president. His office, State House. His office neighbor, the president. He had the president's ear. For the bulky man in his late 30s, this seemed to be the fruition of his activism. He wore spectacles that seemed to affirm that he was a man of vision. He was not fond of suits, but his simplistic shirts were in sharp contrast to the genius that he was. Barrel-chested, he was ready to continue with the fight. All was rosy back then. Kenyans were voted as being one of the most optimistic people on earth. Rightly so, as the economy was starting to open. The international community had started giving aid, giving loans, and bringing investments to Kenya. But beneath it all, the Anglo Leasing scam that had started in the Moi era, its bud had not been dipped. It was still growing. One day, in April of 2004, opposition MP from Ntonyeri, one Honorable Maoka Maore, tabled to Parliament a copy of a tender to supply Kenya with a computerized passport printing and lamination system. This was rightly so because, as we had indicated earlier, the United States was pushing Kenya to have a computerized passport issuing and laminating system, especially in light of the 1998 American embassy bombing in Kenya. It was a comprehensive bid where, upon meeting all technical and capacity specifications, the company with the lowest bid would win the tender. Two firms had submitted their bids, Rue and Face Technologies. The latter had the lowest bid of $6.8 million, but neither won the tender. Instead, the tender was awarded to a company that had not even tendered in the first place, Anglo Leasing Finance Company, and it won the tender for an amount 5 times what Face Technologies had bid, $34 million. But this was just the tip of the iceberg. As John Githongo would later discover, there were 18 such contracts to various companies, all totaling to more than $600 million, equivalent to 50 billion shillings at the time. Here is the list of the companies and the amounts paid out. The whole scandal with all those companies is what is commonly referred to as the Anglo Leasing scandal. Kenya lost approximately 50 billion shillings during that year. I guess by now you know the wheeler dealers behind all these briefcase companies are. The interesting thing though about Anglo Leasing Finance was that the contract was structured such that the fictitious equipment that was to be provided was to be refinanced by the same company. In other words, the company was leasing the equipment to the government of Kenya and was expecting the payments in installments. In fact, with an interest. The amounts were converted into a loan through promissory notes at 6% interest, meaning that the promissory notes could be traded by anyone and on any market, and the government had an obligation to honor them, without which it would mess with its international relations. An illegality had been made to look genuine through an irrevocable contract. As much as Honorable Maoka Maore had made the scandal public, John had been trying to stop it from within the government. He famously said that Moi left us a skunk and we took it home as a pet. He first tried to consult with the then Vice President Moody Awori, who was also in charge of the immigration department for which the passport printing equipment was being procured, but Moody said he'd look into it, but he never did. John then travelled to the UK with the then Justice Minister Keraito Morongi and with the then Finance Minister David Mwiraria, where they had an appointment with the risk consultancy group investigating Goldenberg, Kroll Associates. They asked to check whether Anglo Leasing Finance was legit, but to their surprise, they found that it wasn't. It had no registered offices or any other details. However, this was only news to Githongo, since the fellows that he was traveling with already knew this information. And John's digging would not sit well with them. Keraito would later ask him to go slow, as this investigation, I quote, will knock down key people in the heart of the government, end of quote. The head of public service, Francis Mudaura, would call John regularly, telling him that the Anglo Leasing people had promised to pay back the amounts. The Minister for Internal Security had even told Parliament that the contract had been cancelled, but all this was to hoodwink. And the most telling case of self-incrimination was when the finance minister let slip that he had arranged for a refund from Anglo Leasing by having one of his staff call one Deepak Kamani, son of Chamanal Kamani. But John was relentless. He wanted to see culprits go to jail. He wanted to recover all the money. He wanted to see the smoke. But since he had already crossed the Rubicon, there was no going back even when the consequences were harsh. In an attempt to fight back, the gutter place bloggers were paid to smear John Githongo's name with all manner of private accusations. One said that the reason why he was 40 and unmarried was because he was gay. Another blogger produced a photo of John Githongo with a male lorry driver who was supposed to be his lover. Another claimed that he had a list of prostitutes, both male and female, that frequented his Lavington home. But John kept on digging. The greatest attempt to silence him came one day in May of 2004 in form of blackmail. Honorable Kiraito Morongi summoned him to his office. On the table, he had a letter from A.H. Malik, the lawyer of Anura Pereira. Remember him? He of the 30 million loan to John Githongo's father. It was about that loan. Pereira asked Githongo to stop the investigation so that he could go slow on the loan. But John was relentless. He never listened. In June of 2004, the Anglo Leasing contract was provided for in the budget of Kenya for 2004-2005 to the tune of 200 million shillings. That is when John discovered that the deep state was also relentless not to give up on this, and the president's hands had somehow been tied on this matter. He received threats directly from the mentioned wheel dealers, permanent secretaries, and even the cabinet ministers. But the last effort to contain John would come in a meeting where Kiraito and Mwiraria were in attendance. John was wary of what would happen in that meeting, so he carried a concealed tape recorder. They talked in hushed tones, like two elderly men advising a young man during dowry negotiations. They showed John that he was part of them, the Kikuyu managing the state resources at the time. They advised him against going for Chris Murungaru, Minister for Internal Security, Alfred Getonga, PS for Internal Security, and Jimmy Wanjigi, a wheeler dealer, because according to them, it was the Kikuyu's time to eat. He was also advised against digging into Anura Pereira's account, as this would be detrimental to Anura Pereira, a friend of the head of state. Kiraito claimed that he, Pereira, had even paid for Kibaki's treatment in UK after the 2002 road accident. The contents of that meeting were all caught on tape, and later, during an interview with the BBC, the tape was played, and Kiraito's voice would be heard saying, "Anglo Leasing is us." Later that year, John Githongo's post would be moved from under the ministry. Later that year, John Githongo's post would be moved from the office of the president to the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs. A demotion away from State House, away from the president's ears, and near the Justice Minister, Kiraito Morongi, who could now monitor John. Githongo sought advice from many sources. Among them was the then Chief Justice Aaron Rengera. Rengera admitted to Githongo that once a graft case is in the level of the presidency, he, Rengera, would not touch it. He also advised John that if he tried to leave, quote, they, end of quote, would kill him. Future evidence from WikiLeaks would reveal that Justice Aaron Rengera was compromised. In 2005, Githongo had succeeded in turning many heads and in the same measure attracted many enemies. His efforts would bear the resemblance of some fruits. Some amount, 5 billion, a fraction of the loot, had been returned in court in order to hoodwink the investigating authorities and the general public. The Auditor General had also temporarily stopped further payments to the non-existent companies. But Githongo's woes were far from over. Anura Pereira had sent an emissary through John's father in a true mafia style. The emissary was supposed to talk to John's father so that John's father could talk to him and ask him to stop the investigation. Anura claimed that the investigation was tying up his cash, and he was even afraid of visiting Kenya for fear of getting arrested. By now, even the mighty ministers were not hiding the fact that the Anglo Leasing scam was their scam. Both Kiraito and Morogaro let their guards down every time they met with Githongo in order to convince him to let the matter go to bed. Even Kiraito insinuating that Mwai Kibaki was once the finance minister, so he knew how these things were done. See, in 2005, Kenya was in the middle of a constitutional review. After the amendment, the government split into two. The pro-government side were for the amendment, yes, while the opposers led by Raila Odinga were against it, no. Also, Kibaki's first term would end in another year, and so he needed resources for those two campaigns. So Kiraito and Morogaro prevailed upon John that the funds had to be released in order to fund these campaigns. Mudaura approved all further payments to Anglo Leasing, despite the fact that there was an audit going on. That is when John realized that he was fighting a battle that he'll probably pay for with his own life. In January 2005, John flew to the UK for work, but he did not return. He was in a self-imposed exile. He faxed his resignation letter to the president from the UK, and in that letter, he gave the report upon which this episode is based. Kenyans are not corrupt. Kenyans are in fact embarrassed by being ranked position 828 on the corruption index. Ordinary Kenyans work hard, from deer on the muddy patches of rice plantations to sotik on the gentle highlands of tea plantations. Kenyans work hard. From the fishermen on the shores of Lake Victoria to the pastoralists on the Samburu, Kenyans work hard. From the Maradonas breaking records on world stages to the friendly but fierce rivalry at the Mashemeji Derby, Kenyans are passionate. But the same cannot be said of the politicians. Possibly 90% or more of the politicians are corrupt. And for as long as there will be politicians and political contests, then financial scams will always be there. Until next time, I am Jeff Kafka. Keep vigil.